Hello, hello. Dr. Kirk here to talk more about inversions. So let me just start with a triad here on my staff. And this is an A major triad. And what I have right here is in a triad in root position. So as I've mentioned to you about it being all stacked up in adjacent lines or spaces or looking like a snow person or something, this shows us that the bottom note is the root of the chord. The middle note we call the third of the chord because it is a third above the root. It doesn't matter actually the quality, whether it's a major third or minor third, it's still a third above the root. And the top note here we call the fifth of the chord because it is a fifth above the root. And again, doesn't matter the quality, whether it's a perfect fifth or whatever else. So this type of triad we call root position because it is stacked up right on top of the root. The third and fifth of the chord are all stacked right on top of the root. Okay. Now, as I've shown you before, you can reorder the notes of the chord. It still can be an A major chord, right? Same three notes, A and C sharp and E. But this time I've put the C sharp as the lowest note, which is the third of the chord. And that gives us a first inversion chord. So to determine the inversion of a chord is entirely dependent on the lowest note that you find. It does not matter what order or how far apart the other notes of the chord are. So for the sake of stacking them nicely all in one staff here, we have them real close together, but you could have them very far apart. Your textbook talks also about open and closed position, that is spreading the notes of the chord farther apart. That does not matter to the inversion. It only matters which is the lowest sounding note. And in this case, the C sharp or the third of the chord is the lowest one, and that's going to give us first inversion. Okay. Now, if we take that same chord, that same A major chord, but we put it in a different order, here I still have A and C sharp and E, but this time the E, or the fifth of the chord, is the lowest note. We're going to call this second inversion. Now, there are also ways to express these inversions numerically. And so all we need to do for that is to look at the distances of the notes from the bottom note that is written. So for example, in our root position triad, we have the distance from A all the way up to E, or the bottom note all the way up to the top note, is a fifth. And then the distance from A up to C sharp, or the bottom note to the middle note, is a third. So for a root position triad, sometimes you'll see that expressed as 5-3. Okay, our first inversion triad that we already have written here, the distance from our bottom note C sharp all the way up to our top note A is a sixth. And the distance from our bottom note C sharp to our middle note here E is a third. So you will sometimes see first inversion chords written as 6-3 chords. Okay, and lastly, we have our second inversion chord here. So the distance from the bottom note E all the way up to C sharp is a sixth. And the distance from E to A is a fourth. So you'll see second inversion chords written as 6-4 chords. Okay, so in your homework, you will be given some chords in inversions, and you'll be asked to figure out what that chord and inversion are. So let's choose some examples here. So I'm going to put this in bass clef, and if I have a chord like that's a D. Whoa, that's an ugly D. Let me fix that. Let me make it a better D. All right, so if I have a D there and an F and then a B flat up here. So just looking at it, I can see that this chord is not in root position because it is not stacked up in 3 consecutive lines or spaces. In other words, it does not look like a snow person, right? We see that bottom 2 notes are on 2 consecutive lines, but the distance from that middle note to the top note is a bigger gap. That's going to be a fourth, not a third. So what we want to do first to figure out what our chord is, that is the root name and whether it's major or minor, we want to reorder it so that it goes in order, that is, with the root on the bottom. So in this case, we'll take that top note, B flat, and it fits nicely underneath there. Now the triad is stacked all up in 3 consecutive lines. So that tells us that the root name here is B flat. And now we want to figure out, is it a major triad or a minor triad, or maybe even an augmented or diminished triad? And for that, we need to just quickly remember our little formulas, right? Major third plus a minor third is going to equal a major triad. A minor third plus a major third is going to equal a minor triad. A major third plus a major third, or 2 major thirds, in other words, is going to equal an augmented triad, or sometimes you'll see the plus sign for augmented. And a minor third plus a minor third is going to equal a diminished triad. And sometimes you'll see the little circle sign for that. All right, so this particular chord, I have B flat, D, F for my chord. So let's check out. Here's a B flat on my keyboard. I can't quite see that very well. Let me just switch. Let's just switch colors real quick. Okay, we're red. So we want to get from B flat over here to D. Let's go ahead and count the half steps, because as you know, 4 half steps is going to give us a major third, and 3 half steps is going to give us a minor third. So the distance from that B flat to B is 1 half step, B to C is another half step, C to this black key, which we can call C sharp or D flat, either way, that's 3 half steps, and then to D there is 4 half steps. So that's a major third. And then we want to get from D to the last note of our chord is F. So let's see, we've got from D to E flat is 1 half step, E flat to E is another half step, and then E to F is a third half step. So the 3 half steps is going to equal a minor third. So in this case, we have a major third from B flat to D, and then a minor third from D up to F. So that's going to give us a major triad. So we know that the root here is B flat. This is a major triad. You can use a capital M. And then we also want to consider what inversion it is. So before we went reordering our notes here to put them in order in root position so that we could figure out all the rest of the information we need to know about that chord, we found that the third of the chord was on the bottom. So the chord is B flat, D, F, and the D was here on the bottom. That's going to give us a first inversion chord. So we could express this several ways. You could write B flat major, and you could actually write out first inversion. It'll just take you a little bit more room to write it. Or you could write the numbers 6, 3. as we have up here on the top of the page to indicate first inversion. Okay, let's do one or two more of these, and then I'll let you work on this on your own. Let's do here. We've got a B flat on the bottom. We like B flats. And an E flat and a G up on top. All right, so same as the last one. We want to first put these notes in order so that they're stacked up in root position. Then we can easily figure out what the root of the chord is and the quality. And then we can talk about the inversion. Now, if you prefer to figure out the inversion first, since it's already configured that way, you can certainly do that. Does not matter one way or another. All right, so to put this in order, I can see the distance between my bottom two notes has a bigger gap between them. That's actually going to be a fourth away. And the top two notes are only a third away. And that's what we want, right? We want them all in thirds. So if we take that bottom note and flop it up on top, it'll sit there nicely on top of the staff. And then I can picture my whole triad here, right? I can just ignore that bottom note or erase it or cross it off or whatever you prefer. So now I can see that my triad is E flat, G, and B flat. So the root of the chord there is E flat. And now I need to figure out the distances between those, whether minor or major thirds, so that I can figure out the quality of my triad. Okay, so let's do that. Now, so we're starting with an E flat, which is here, and we want to get up to G, from E flat to G. So from this flat key, E flat to E is one half step, E to F is another half step, F to F sharp or G flat is another half step, and then from that to G is another half step. So that's giving us 4 half steps, which is a major third. Okay, and then we need to get from G up to B flat for our last interval. So G to A flat to A to B flat is 3 half steps, which is another minor third. So a major third plus a minor third is going to give us a major triad. I know I chose 2 major triads in a row. Cool. Now we want to think about the inversion. And just like the last one, before we went reordering our chord and moving things around and all of that, making it all messy, we had the B flat on the bottom. And since we've discovered that the chord is E flat, G, and B flat, that means that B flat on the bottom is the 5th of the chord, right? So that's going to give us a second inversion triad. So we can either write out the words second inversion, or we can use the numbers 6, 4. Okay, so you see those numbers take up a little bit less space. So I would encourage you to practice using those. But as we're just getting used to the idea of inversions, you can really go either way, write out the word or use the numbers. Now, further down the line, just in a couple of chapters really, we'll be using those numbers exclusively and not writing out the words anymore. So if that's something you want to go ahead and get practice with, that would be great. Okay, I hope this helps. Please let me know if you have any questions as you're working through your inversions.